Good evening and welcome to Jones & Company. I'm your host, Brian Jones, and today we have two very special guests joining us on the topic of food security. First off, we have Alan Butler, who's the chairman of Milo Butler Corporation. Thank you for coming on. And we have his cousin, Javon Butler, who is the chairman of Milo Butler and Sons Distributors. Thank you for coming on as well.
Thank you, Mr. Jones, for inviting us.
Right, and so today, a very interesting topic in the sense that it touches everyone, right? Everyone's got to eat, right? And so we're very excited that you're able to join us, and I hope we get to cover a lot of ground. It's only 1 hour. We'll see how much we can cover.
Okay.
Good.
Okay.
And so first of all, before we dive into this complicated issue of feeding ourselves, Alan, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself, your role in Milo Butler Corporation, and what the company actually does?
So Milo Butler Corporation would have been, so we're starting from the end, working backwards, more or less. And Milo Butler Corporation would have been formed in 2018, 2019 rather, and it was actually a split-off from the parent company, which would have been Milo B. Butler and Sons. It has three arms to it: Milo Butler Investments, so Milo Butler Investments, Milo Butler Distributors, which Javon is chairman of, and then Milo Butler Corporation, which encompasses all of them combined. So it's a mixture of all three of them as chairman. So I sit as chairman of Milo Butler Corporation. Prior to that, Milo Butler and Sons, which would have been the food distribution business, would have started out at least became incorporated in 1963. 1963, so this year marks our 59th anniversary, next year being our 60th, the same year that our country will be celebrating its 50th, we'll be celebrating our 60th anniversary as an incorporated company. Prior to that though, our grandfather, Javon and I mutually, so Milo Butler Sr., would have started food distribution and food store his business in 1928. So we're looking at a legacy of over 90 years almost of food distribution and other sorts within our country called the Bahamas. We're now third generation of individuals who are now running the business and doing all of these things. My experience would have started, I guess as a little tot, as a bagging boy working in the grocery store, trying to make a few dollars and so on, etc. So I would have started at age 7, but officially my aim in the business did not probably start until 1987. For a short stint, I went off to university, worked with a company in the United States for about 4 or 5 years, came back, did my master's degree and my MBA, and also have been working with the business ever since. So I have been, I guess, unbroken chain. I've been working with the company now. This year marks my 25th year, working with Milo B. Butler and Sons and watching food distributions all around. So I've had, I guess you could say, a wealth of experience both locally as well as abroad, having worked with a fairly large chain in the southeastern United States whilst I was there for after college and all the rest of it and so on. So it's indeed a pleasure to be able to be here and to be able to render that side of the business and be able to render what my contribution has been to trying to continue on the legacy, as well as being able to meet the needs of the Bahamian people at large.
Fantastic, yes, and so you made a tremendous contribution thus far with the company. It's going to be interesting to hear about some of your plans for the future. Well, before we get into that, Javon, so tell us a bit about the distribution side of the business that you're running. Yeah.
So the distribution side, as Alan mentioned, we've been in the business now for almost 100 years. And it is a family business. When I say it's a family business, we all would have spent some time in the business, from young lads working in various capacities. I actually grew up above one of the stores. So Alan's sister, I would go to the store after school and help out. On Saturdays, other family members would come and work the stores, particularly Alan's siblings. And, just being a part of that day to day. So for us, the weekend wasn't going to baseball practice or going to swim practice. It was going to work. And when you're young, of course, you want to do what all your other friends are doing. However, it helps to really develop a good work ethic. In terms of distribution itself, our footprint is that we are wholesalers, one of the main wholesalers in this country, with several agencies from throughout the world. We have agencies coming out of Asia, Europe, United States, as well as Latin America. From the retail standpoint, we have our location on Blue Hill Road that has been a staple in the Baintown community, Bain and Grantstown community for years. And lastly, we also have the liquor distribution, which is called the Flying Dutchman Liquor Stores, presently with a footprint of 3 stores, one in the east, one Blue Hill Road, and then one in the west. The Chief Executive Officer of Miley Butler Distributors is our cousin Damien Butler, and he, similar to Alan, is what I call a legacy employee. He has worked with the business since coming back from university, and I think he's now entering his 20th year?
Yes.
Entering his 20th year. So when we really look at the cornerstones of our day-to-day operation, you're looking at Damien as our CEO, Alan as Director of Retail, and our cousin Antoine, who is the operations manager for the company. So that's the family dynamic of the business.
Right.
I know there are a lot of individuals who feel like there are 300 butlers in the world working in this business, which is inaccurate. During the course of time, after G2 started passing away, we had to embrace external talent, skill set and expertise that exists here in the Bahamas. So our sales and marketing manager, our financial controller, other key components of the business are run by non-Butler family members, and they are as engaged in the business as we are. For us, it's different because we can have a conversation about business at any point in time during the day or night. Right. Whereas you have to learn to turn it off and turn it on because other individuals have their own families and their own responsibilities and their own concerns. However, to really have everyone engaged and to see how the times change, but the business continues to grow, how we keep looking for innovative ways to stay ahead of the curve. And in all honesty, the continuing conversation and dialogue amongst other agencies, other retailers, where we as Bahamians are now understanding that, hey, we no longer have to be the big fish in a small pond. You know, there are 8-9 billion people globally that we need to come together collectively and find a way to service that clientele. And I think that really leads into your topic of food security and what does that mean for the Bahamas.
Right, that's right. I mean, I like the way you painted the picture. As we can see, there's a lot of moving parts in the food. Well, basically looking at manufacturing and distribution. So you have a combination of what are we producing and how are we getting it to those who want to consume it.
Agreed.
Right? And so, I mean, one of the biggest concerns about the food sector is the bill that we pay, right? The import bill, that is, right? So basically, we know that there's a lot of complexities to it, but the fact is we're not producing enough, right? We're importing pretty much everything. So what is the current state of play there in terms of why are we importing so much and why are we not producing?
Well, I'd like to look at it from a holistic standpoint,
Sure.
the macro, and Alan really can look at it from the ground level and explain what's happening within the Bahamas, just from an international standpoint.
Sure.
Right now, unfortunately, there is an ongoing war in Eastern Europe. 40% of the wheat supply in the world is provided by those two countries. All right, was reading an article sometime last week, and it indicated that there are millions and millions of tons of grains that are just spoiling because they can't be shipped out of the Ukraine.
That's right.
Okay. It really started with the pandemic. With the pandemic, the world stopped. When the world stopped, of course, as a manufacturer, I'm going to scale down on the amount of items I produce because I have an operating cost to go along with those items.
Of course.
So everyone scaled down. People were home, people were not moving around as much as they used to. Consumer spending was not where it was. And then the world slowly started to reopen.
Yes.
So the demand increased. During the pandemic, you also had a uptick in e-commerce platforms, and a lot of individuals were ordering online. So that demand slowly increased, and as that demand increased, you then saw the manufacturers scattering to produce these products to ensure that they can ship them out. They had COVID issues within their factories where they're staffing now. They may have had to close a plant, may have had to close a location because they were under quarantine. So, of course, the supply slows down. Also, we found that the containers, there was a shortage of containers globally. Containers weren't getting into the port in a timely fashion, being returned to these manufacturers in a timely fashion. So now you started hearing the supply chain issues that the world faced.
Yes.
Now you walk into 2022, and we were trying to regularize those supply chain issues. Now you're dealing with inflation. America has already shown us that their inflationary rates have jumped astronomically. We're feeling it at the pump here in the Bahamas. We're feeling it through the shipping costs. When we look at what the cost of a container compared to 2-3 years ago, it's almost doubled. You're now looking at the cost of the insurance for that container, the fuel cost for that ship, and all of these throughputs are now factoring into what we're paying inside of the grocery store. So from a granular standpoint, that's what we're experiencing.
Right.
But here on the ground, I guess Alan can speak more to the food supply here in the Bahamas, and where do you see it going?
Well, as far as the food supply goes, I think all of those things you just mentioned, which has actually caused a somewhat of a halt or slowdown or break being applied to many of the consumers in terms of what they shop. But bear in mind now too, let's go back a step further. We look at a situation when we introduced this whole idea of no plastic bags being used due to us being eco-friendly and all the rest of it, which would have been even before much of the individuals who would have, before COVID and all the rest of it. With that also came, well, I guess even prior to that, you introduced taxes. You introduced VAT. In the introduction of VAT, you slowed down some of the spending right then, because there again now 10% was being added on to people's things. Here it is, many persons did not have the increase of 10% covered by their respective jobs, whatever have you, to be able to afford 10% more. So if an individual came into, say, my store, for instance, and they were given a voucher of some sort, whether it be a government voucher or a private voucher, they were only allowed to spend 10%. They were allowed to spend 90% of that voucher, because the other 10% of that voucher went to the government. All right, so there was no extra even being given in for that. So their purchasing power was diminished even from then. Then you add in this whole process of no plastic bags being issued. Now, persons now had to purchase these bags. If you went to the various food stores, wherever they would have been, they were now charging you for a bag that you would have to purchase. Because more often than not, most persons would not even remember now. This is a new culture you're now getting involved with. So persons actually reduced the amount of stuff that they actually bought, because I have no means of being able to tote this stuff out. So you're relying on boxes to be at the registers and all the rest of it. That further, and then came along COVID. COVID came along. When COVID came, people did not know how to treat it. And so what they ended up doing, they treated it like how they would treat a storm, a hurricane. So they all flocked to the stores trying to get in these long lines, because they figured now, hey, we need to get all of these things now because food is going to be in short supply. You would have heard various food distributors in the country who would have come on and said, oh, we have enough to last us for X amount of time and so on. And granted, we did at the time. And then after a while, we noticed that many of those things became not as readily available as they once were. Then some new things came on stream that we otherwise would not have spent a whole lot of time in. Things like hand sanitizers, disinfectants, and things of that nature. Things of which we don't even have the chemistry at all to even do here, or have not done here in the Bahamas at any great length of time. So you would have found that many of the wholesalers within the United States, where we would have gotten most of these type of items from, like aerosol sprays and sanitizers, they were saying, we have to protect our own first. Then we will send you whatever we have left. So despite the fact that we may be a small nation of less than 400,000 people, they were still treating us or putting us on the back burner. Because that was still, as far as they was concerned, considerable. So that started the process of slower movement and greater demands, raising the prices, your typical economic storm, so to speak. Higher demand, increased prices. All right, and here it is, after fewer goods being offered in the market. So when they became available, you found you found a lot of other different brands. One we not have heard prior to COVID coming on stream. All right, and coming on stream in a big way to be able to see how they could best produce for the market and so on. Then, of course, after a while, after things began to roll on, we found that there was a food distribution where food supplies were being slowed down, because many of the factories in the United States, particularly where we would have gotten most of our food supplies, where they were finding that many of their people were infected with COVID. They don't know how to treat it. We're now suffering with well over 700,000 people who have died from this thing called COVID in the United States. And so therefore, we're going to tell these people, you cannot come to work. With those factories being closed on, particularly things like Tyson, where we got most of our poultry from, another pork industry, IBP, some of those major companies who would have produced large amounts of food, large amounts of things that we consume in the Bahamas, and the biggest two meats in the Bahamas consume is pork and chicken. All right? With that not being readily available as quickly as you would want it, therefore cause these demands to go up, prices to go up, and availability to also not be as readily available as quickly or as readily as they once were. All of these things sort of cause that sort of dynamic to occur. Then, after a while, things started to subside then comes along the war. And the war, as Javon would have alluded to, stated with all of the wheat supplies, bear in mind the wheat doesn't just necessarily just supply us with grains, but they also feed for these same animals that you need to have. So therefore the cost of producing an item like a chicken or a pig goes up tremendously. So you think of what you get from the pig. You get your pig feet, you get your pork chops, you get your spare ribs, you get your pig ears, and we use the whole pig here in the Bahamas, all right? You get your pork chop ends, you get your whole loins. You get all of these different things that we use typically in our meals. You get your sausages. All of those type of things have now become, I guess, impeded because of the fact of the war that is now in place. And then to compound the whole situation, you have a situation where you have difficulty with bringing in the product. So here it is now, where you may have had an increment, a small increment, increase from the manufacturer as far as the cost is concerned, you have an even bigger cost stretch with the shipping costs being going up, and no indication as to when it goes until it lands in the Bahamas. So you have no pre-knowledge of this happening until the product reaches you, and then you say, oh, the price just increased by 50%. Say, what? How could that have happened? And we're now having, as consumers, as wholesalers, as retailers, to absorb that. And unfortunately, we have to now pass it on. The one great break, I must say, of late, and I do thank the present government for doing, is somewhat of a levy in terms of being able to give us a bit of a breather in some of the taxations that we have. But here it is now, that in itself is coming. I don't want to be I'm ungrateful, but it is coming a bit late when you consider the Bahamian who has to consume on a daily basis, everyone who has to consume on a daily basis, when you've had VAT and the duties and all of these extra costs being added on a regular basis, and it makes it very, very difficult for the consumer now. Now there's some bit of a relief. Hopefully things will begin to look a little bit better, but even still with that, it's going to still pose a big of a problem for at least another 18 months or so.
Right. And so in considering that, I mean, the pandemic has really given us a rude awakening across the board.
Yes.
Many industries have found the need to incorporate new technologies and pivot and essentially rise to the occasion. What have you seen been done here locally in terms of basically improving our food security situation, whether it's on the farming, agricultural side, or anything else that can be done to really improve the security?
Well, backyard farming is actually increased by among a small group of people, but unfortunately, it has not garnered teeth yet, whereby, for instance, you, Mr. Jones, you've now producing enough sweet peppers, and I'm producing tomatoes. We're not bartering enough or doing enough to cause that change in our own neighborhoods yet. So we're producing some of these things, and then sometimes we have good product, sometimes we don't have good product, but not enough whereby we're causing a true change in our pocketbooks, or seeing those changes in our pocketbooks. So we're still relying on the food stores to be able to do. Now, what we've not seen happen is where enough has been done, where we've been able to pool these resources, say the likes of a Javon Butler, who has said, okay, I see Mr. Jones and I see Mr. Butler now has these different products. Let me see if I could bring these together, or bring them together, and get what they have, store it for them, and be able to distribute for those who are unable to get to them specifically. And so our distribution seems to be off in terms of how we bring these things to market, be it for the season, because here it is now, we grow everything in one season, and you growing tomatoes, and I'm growing tomatoes, and everybody's growing tomatoes, and so therefore we have this excess spoilage, excess amount, and it spoils, not being used to do anything else, like say for instance, making of tomato paste, making of ketchup, making of all these other things that tomatoes would be used for, other than just in its pure original form.
Right.
And so therefore we have all of this going on right now, and with all of our produce that has happened, we have not seen enough change happen within the market to cause this sort of thing to happen, the food security to really be done. And I hate to say it, but we tend to politicize our own food supply, which is something we ought not done. We ought to look at this and saying this is really an agenda that is national. It being national, no matter who is in power, should really take this very, very seriously and give it teeth. Giving it teeth by means of how we really go about tackling those individuals who happen to have the facilities to be able to store these products and to be able to get them to market on a continual and ongoing basis. To strategize how we're going to go about making this tomatoes available in January, in June, in September, and in December. By the whatever new technologies are made available. And there are some out there that we can actually adapt and begin to use. We've often been told on numerous occasions that we don't have the soil in which to do it. Well, I visited Israel in 2000, in the year 2000, and that's 22 years ago, and noticed that Israel has similar type of land base as we do, sand, and not really soil, but yet still, most of its export of its produce, which it produced, was going to Europe. Fancy that. It produced enough for itself and also enough to send to Europe on an ongoing basis. And I figured the Bahamas, in its climate and in its range, could do the same thing.
That's right. We certainly have enough land.
We surely have enough land.
It's not like our population
Absolutely.
is that
And so
tremendous.
therefore I think we have the archipelago that we live in to actually work to our advantage, but we're not using it sufficiently.
So my reality, coming out of fintech and being involved in fintech today, I see that transition from the digitization of creating that marketplace that is mentioned by Alan. And it's at its infancy. So there's a lot of backyard farming. There are individuals who, are presently just sharing their crops, their produce. Last week my neighbor gave me a handful of dillies that grew on his dilly tree. But creating that market end-to-end logistical supply chain is something that's being discussed, something that's being addressed. I see that there are several entities that are coming out of the ground where they are now looking to get into the space of being incubators for several farmers. We've seen successes with farms that are now located on Glaston Road where they're using the container models for farming, and everything now is the what do you call it? The hydroponics, thank you,
right.
The hydroponics. So small positive incremental steps. It's moving in that direction.
But the thing about it is, Javon, I hear you say that,
Yeah.
and I agree with you in as far as those small steps have been made. But those small steps have been made for the past 15 years.
Yeah.
We've now had 3 successive governments that have done and spoken about the same thing, and yet we have not gotten past base 1. Surely by now we should have been a whole lot further with it than we have been. Now I hope that this time around we actually give it some real wheels so it can actually roll and make it a going concern moving forward. But we have not really seen that.
What would you say is the main inhibitor for backyard farmers coming together, pooling resources, and getting them out for useful consumption?
Well, the backyard farmers have done what they've done out of pure desperation. Because of the fact that they've noticed that these prices are so high, they've now started, you know what, I need to do something. Their backs were against the wall. I don't have the monies going in. I'm unable to go to work as I once could have, because now, here it is now, my bosses have said to us, we're unable to come to work, and many of us aren't food distributors like such as myself, and so I work in a bank, or I work in an insurance company and so on. So let me find something else to do to utilize my time and my skills and utilize some skill set, even developing a new one. Let me try this farming situation and see how it works. And they had success. And with their successes, they then went ahead and it sort of began to share. And in their sharing, others got a hold of it and decided to do the same thing. And it was a wonderful thing to get started. Now, how do we continue it? How do we now pull these people together to cause that to happen? Because here it is, Gladstone Road has been running for quite some time now. How do we now get those people to market, to be able to get those products on our shelves in a regular grocery store, and to get them to sell their stuff on a regular basis, to put whatever the requirements are needed, so we don't just have products here in our stores, but we can also even begin to sell them internationally.
That's right.
And I think that those type of things are things we need to try to meet and make happen.
Yeah, I think when we come back from this break, we do need to explore how we're going to basically achieve scale, and then take it to the next level, right? In terms of exporting and taking some of our unique Bahamian cuisine and treasures to the world as well.
Exactly.
From a cultural engagement perspective. Right, so that first segment was brought to you by Milo Butler and Sons Distributors, as well as Agio Digital, and we'll be right back. Thank you. Welcome back to Jones and Company. I'm your host, Brian Jones. The first and second episode, oh Christ.
Start again, don't worry about it. Been there.
All right, starting again. Good evening and welcome back to Jones and Company. I'm your host, Brian Jones, and today I'm joined by both Javon Butler and Alan Butler on the topic of food security. And so in the first segment that was brought to you by Mino Butler & Sons distributors, as well as Azure Digital, we covered some of the issues relating to food security, some of the problems in putting food on the table, and also the supply chain issues that is basically challenging the entire world. And so, gentlemen, we've identified a lot of the problems, and I think you alluded to some of the solutions. Yeah. Let's get into some of those, right? We've been looking at all the different players, right, who are responsible for food security. We're talking about our farmers. You have manufacturers, and then you also have the whole logistical arm of it, right? Mm-hmm. Distribution and everything that goes along with that, the financial components, the making sure the right items get to the right places. Mm-hmm. So help us understand, how do we bring this all together to ensure that we end up with food security in this nation?
Well,
want to take that, Javon?
Yeah, I can start there. I found that, and this is where my cousin and I may differ, I found that successive governments have tried to get agriculture to a certain level, a certain standard. Mm-hmm. The reality is, you can grow as much product as you want. If you don't have the right logistical chain, the right supply chain in place, it's still going to fall on deaf ears. All right. We've seen retailers, including ourselves, who wish to support the local farmers, but it's just the logistics of getting it from Andros, from the boat to your store, getting it from Exuma to the boat to your store, and now you're spending more time outside of your establishment trying to gather and collect this produce, trying to gather, collect this livestock that may have been slaughtered over there, and you're trying to sell it out of your coolers, and dealing with that side of the business instead of actually just selling the product. So personally, I feel if we can figure out the logistical component of the food supply, really creating the right market, all right? We've danced around that market forever. Everyone now, the new talking point is cryptocurrency. Before that, you would have talked about the stock exchange, but all of that started from the commodities market. Mm-hmm. You can't run from that. We do not have a proper market in place where the farmer in Exuma or in Andros or in Agua, and the farmer could be here in Nassau, the backyard farmer. Mm-hmm. Smaller scale, but understanding that, hey, the price of tomatoes is going to be X in the month of November. All right, so I'm willing to grow some tomatoes, and I know I'm off-season, Alan, so you can correct me, right? But whatever the price is going to be at that point in time, that future should dictate why I should grow this product. Now, if we have a surplus, what are we doing with those products? We had the days of the canning factories, mm-hmm. and it's no longer where it used to be. So why is it we're not looking to get back into canning on some of the various family islands? There are many Bahamians in our age set, I know you're younger than us, who will tell you the stories of going to Cat Island during the summer and helping mom or granddad in the farm. That was the summer vacation, all right? Mm-hmm. So you help during the day. After that, you spend time with your cousins, your loved ones. You got away from the big city, and it brought you back down to a level of stability and true family life, true island life. We have to get back there. We can't be afraid to get there. The argument has always been, well, we can't grow enough food to sustain ourselves. That's true. When we think of telecommunication, when we first received internet connectivity through your telephone router, for 10 hours it cost $20, and then $2.50 each additional hour. But nowadays you can buy a phone plan, a data phone plan through either carrier, mm-hmm. and you can have that for $20, $30. So as we scale, as more people become involved, as my cousin would always say to me, the cost of change, as more people become involved and more people start getting into farming at a smaller scale, at a medium scale, at a granular scale, and now you have the markets to support that farming. And I envision those markets really having brokers who will act as the point people and say, hey, Mr. Jones, I know you're part of my backyard farming network, all right? I'm going to gather the crops. Mm-hmm. I'm going to carry them to Milo Butler Mart. I'm going to ensure that there's a place for these to be sold, and I'll be responsible for collecting the cash on your behalf, making sure we're paid. If you can get those middlemen involved, mm-hmm. the lawyer, the doctor, the accountant is more inclined, because you know what? Saturday mornings between 8 a.m. and 10 a.m., this individual, this company is coming to collect these items. They have a scale on the back of the trucks. They weigh them. They give me a written receipt that here's what I've collected from you. They then will send funds to me, either cutting a check or in some digital form.
Is that how it works in larger, more developed nations?
And, well, I'll give you a prime example. In South Florida, Central Florida more so. Central Florida was always known for its orange groves. They had a huge real estate boom, and they realized that they weren't producing sufficient oranges. So you are incentivized as a tax deductible if you are willing to grow citrus trees in your yard, and then people will come and collect the citrus. So people are thinking outside of that box. That's where we need to get. All right. There's nothing wrong with getting into farming, but I'm not going to run around and try to see if I can sell my products at the Products Exchange.
Right.
All right. I think what BAIC is doing with the pop-ups is an excellent idea. But the next step now is to really embrace the business owners, the grocers who've been in this space for a period of time, find that happy medium, and find out how all of us can work together to ensure that the product is getting from the soil onto the shelves, onto your plate at home.
Is part of it also making sure that we're trying to produce or grow the right things? Kind of get in where we fit in what actually works with our soil and environment?
I not so much the soil, so much. Yes, to some degree the soil. But I do remember that a few years back, when they were really trying to get Bamsey off of the ground, one of the products they introduced or started out with was papaya. I'm thinking, papaya? Okay, I know papaya. I've had the fruit. I like it, etc. But it's not a staple here in the Bahamas per se.
Right.
I would have started out with something in the lines of what Bahamians used to cook with on a regular: sweet peppers, tomatoes, celery, things of that nature. Onions. Those are the type of things that you probably need to be producing or have produced by the farmers, be it backyard or those who are doing it on a larger scale, to be able to begin to get to market those items that you need to get on a regular basis. Then once you see what those demands are and see what the quality is, then you develop a quality control to make sure that there's the same quality of that which they would have had all along, all right? Because you don't need to be bringing something to market and the average consumer is looking at it, this is not as what I got last week. And of course, what you got last week came from United States or came from Central America, all right, via the United States or through the United States. So with that, you need to make sure that your quality is also there on a consistent basis to make sure that you have that product that people will actually be willing to buy and put their monies on. And the other thing is too, we have to make sure we educate our clients or our people on the product that is produced in our nation. For instance, they may see a green colored orange and think that, hey, that orange is not fit to eat right now. Whereas the person may have grown groves of oranges, they just came up with a slight bit of orange color in them, but they're actually terrific and they're sweet, but they're green. So we need to educate our people in terms of the types of oranges that we actually have available in our market. And Bahamians ought not feel as though they are of a lesser quality. The bananas are another prime example. You would tend to get a banana that you would buy in the store, maybe a Dole or a Chiquita, that would normally get and has this bright yellow color to it. And you assume that all bananas are supposed to be that color. The average Bahamian banana may not have that bright yellow color. It may have a tint of yellow with some black streaks on it. But the eye has been trained by the average Bahamian in the banana. If you see that black, that means it's starting to go bad. But not necessarily so. The black streak tends to just tell you that's where the sugar content is. So you look at our bananas, it tends to be sweeter, more natural. It has none of those extra things inside them that your body does not need. And I think you would cut back on the amount of sicknesses people actually get because you have what we call an organically grown produce item that you otherwise would not get. So those type of things we need to be able to educate our people on those who are actually growing these products and those who are actually selling them to the customers so they can be educated on what it is they're actually getting. They'll be very surprised to know that once they begin to do those things, a lot of these entities will actually come to fruition. The other thing is too, we have a lot of distributors, Milo, Butler and Sons included, who actually have storage spaces for much of the product that is brought here. The government does not have to do this by itself. We can then become storers of product that we actually need. We also have a registry or a book that comes out to tell you how much we actually consume in any given month of the year of any product that we have. So with that, you can actually give a lead time to farmers tentatively as to how much is used here in this country in which months of the year, so that when farmers go out to grow certain products, they have a gauge of what is actually used. Maybe increases maybe by additional 5 or 10% if you expect an additional growth in a particular product. And that way then you begin to gauge and begin to see exactly what you're using here on this market on an ongoing basis. And then see exactly how close to that you can actually do. Now bear in mind, our food supply here in the Bahamas is about $1 billion a year. I'm not saying we may be able to cut it all out,
Right.
but let's say we cut it in half.
Yeah.
Or even a quarter.
Well, that's the food bill I was talking about earlier.
$250 million is a great savings for us that we could then use towards other things. If we are producing those items and be able to produce enough to at least to help in the process,
Let me ask a
if not fully eliminate.
What about the manufacturers, and not even the manufacturers, but farmers and manufacturers? Do they have the right incentives or sufficient incentives to produce what we need to be produced and to manufacture what we need to be manufactured?
I don't think they do.
Yeah.
What's missing there?
I would take a crack at that.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
Alan mentioned the $1 billion food bill.
Yeah.
All right. We've seen in the most recent budget and communication, the government is putting funds towards agriculture. All right. You have a minister who comes from a fishing background, so he understands the power of farming and fishing. It's more so fishing. What's missing is that logistical network I mentioned, because there are private entities outside of the Bahamas who are looking to fund farming projects. But why am I going to fund this project if I don't see how initially at a domestic level I'm getting a return? And even if I'm not getting return, now we're scaling where I can now export this product. $1 billion is a lot of money. Alan mentioned $250 million. Could you imagine that $250 million circulating back into our economy? We always have this discussion. Can you imagine how you as a consumer,
we will feel
you
that
will
it's
feel
We
it.
will definitely feel it.
All right, you as the consumer buying it from the grocer, who may be buying it from the wholesaler, who is buying it from the farmer, and now the farmer is going back and they're paying who they need to pay, their staff and so forth. It would definitely be felt, that trickle effect, right? We have to always think of the dollar that we spend and how that dollar circulates in our economy. Lastly, we have the ability to create proper markets if we treat farming as a byproduct of tourism.
Okay. Yeah.
You now have people moving into Airbnbs. When that tourist comes to the Bahamas, they're renting a vehicle and they're going to the local grocer.
Right.
So instead of them just having the traditional Vegas style experience, they're now having the native experience. So wouldn't it be great if when they go to the grocer they can get, and you have to be very careful because organic, there are a lot of legalities behind it. They can get native grown produce. They can have native grown livestock. They can get some Long Island mutton. They may be able to get some pork that's being grown somewhere off Cowpen Road. If we start doing this now, that indirect spend, because that tourist now is going to feed themselves, right? They may pick up some jams and pick up some teas. That's how we get food sales to where they need to be in a more quicker fashion.
Right.
But
Right.
I don't know if you want to chime in there.
Yeah, about incentivizing, greater production or more specialized production, whether it's farming or manufacturing.
I think what Javon just said makes a lot of sense. But we found a lot of ins and outs. And I think one of the things we need to delve into is, we had farmers like, for instance, the abaco bird. We've had Mr. Minas in Grand Bahama that was growing chickens as well as eggs and so on. We had Rainbow Farms right there on Cowpen Road that was producing eggs, and we had Gladstone Farms, which we all know, that was probably the largest producer of chickens here in the country for quite some time. However, they were finding that their cost of production was just so great. I'm not sure whether or not we had sufficient subsidies from government to be able to keep these things ongoing. So I think it's more than just government, but it has to be government, a mixture of government and private sector to be able to cause this to really be, this has to be a union that is shared by all. It just cannot be one section that takes on the full brunt of this to cause this to be a going concern, because this is our food security for the nation and for those who visit us.
Right.
And I think if we begin to take those types of things on, we'd better be able to find better means of being able to bring to market and see where our pitfalls are and be able to correct them as we go. We won't get it all right the first time around, but I do feel that once you begin to put these things in play and begin to put the logistics, as Javon alluded to earlier, in play, we begin to see exactly the ways towards the right direction, to the ultimate goal that we're trying to get to, which is more of a food security. And we would not be at the risk of really, depending on that, looking for that boat to come into shore with that treasure called food, which should not be a treasure called food when we could produce it ourselves.
That's right. And so in terms of making more readily accessible, I think you mentioned this concept of a marketplace.
Yeah.
Right? So you're talking about, we're not talking about like a physical marketplace. You're talking about a virtual one?
I'm talking about a combination of both.
A combination of the two.
Fantastic. So how would that work, and how would that really help us with our archipelagic makeup?
So if you look at a Milo Butler Mart, that's going to be your brick and mortar that has the storage capacity to store certain produce. It'll be one of many in the network, along with other local grocers who have decided now that we really want to support and endorse our local farmers.
Right.
You now take entities that are into the digital platforms, the digital spaces. I won't call any, not to be biased. And you say, hey, I want you to build out marketplaces where I can connect the farmer to Mr. Butler's store. All right. This currency is moving across this digital platform. So the farmer's happy,
Right.
Mr. Butler's happy. And now it's just going to the boat. You have the boat in the equation, they're happy. So now you're connecting all of the dots, all right? And this is happening at the touch of a finger. It isn't a new concept to us in the Bahamas. Every Bahamian, well, let me don't exaggerate, but the majority of Bahamians at some point in time, either themselves or a family member, have shopped on Amazon. So we understand e-commerce.
Well, my mind went straight to Amazon.
Right,
Marketplace.
exactly.
Right.
We went to e-commerce,
Yes.
and it's interesting because Amazon has done it so well. When you hear marketplace, synonymously you think Amazon, you know. But that's the way we have to start thinking.
Right.
And it's amazing the fact that we are an archipelago
Yeah.
that we have not actually thought of this sooner, because here it is now. Our design just lends to that sort of service on an ongoing basis. You know, another thing I would also see coming on stream too would be slaughterhouses, because not just to look at food supply in terms of fruits and vegetables, but look in terms of livestock and where they can be grown. Grazing in a southern island as Rum Cay, I understand that a lot of cows are actually grown there on Rum Cay, and it was actually an excellent place for grazing of cows. So if you were to use cows and say some other things, that there goes your beef. So all of your steaks and so on that we use, we're not a very big market for beef, but whatever market we have, we can actually help that market by growing these animals on those remote islands, so to speak, and being able to use that to be able to do exactly the same things. And the hydroponics, being introduced those islands out there, like the Ragged Islands and so on. We spoke a few years ago, I think it was something that was presented on 60 Minutes in reference to sourcing of the sun's energy and being able to use Ragged Island as a means of being able to do that. So why don't we use the same set of technology, not just on Ragged Island, but other remote islands, to do the same sort of thing and be able to get what you need to do to produce the vegetables and fruits. Have your boats regularly go to these islands to be able to pick up slaughtered animals that are produced locally, have them stored at that particular thing and bring to market as you need be. Those are the ways in which putting that sort of logistics into play that Javon spoke about to come to market and getting where they need to go. So whether it be here as the final destination, being New Providence, and this is where the populace is, or exporting, or using at hotels.
Exactly.
Has Milo Butler as a group or organization ever gotten into the farming space?
We were in the farming space for a number of years, and we were producing some items. However, there again, not having that level of commitment all around made it very, very, very challenging.
Right.
But that was the whole intent. We wanted to get into that space. We were trying to make ourselves vertically integrated and to really come from the ground straight on up. We are looking at some other means of getting into it again in livestock, but we're going to see exactly how that actually pans out. So we have never lost hope of that being a means by which that can happen. We still believe that can happen, and we're trying our hands with it right now as we speak.
And one of the things that we've always recognized, and not just Milo Butler and Sons Limited, Milo Butler Distributors, Milo Butler Mart, as a nation, we have done well being merchants. Okay? We have done exceptionally well being merchants. At some point in time in our nation's history, we're going to be 50 next year. we have to think like manufacturers, okay? And not just from an agricultural standpoint. Anything that we do, we have to think that we are going to produce the product or the service that's going to be used at a domestic level and then scaled and exported globally. That's a paradigm shift. The younger generation gets it, but now it's connecting their ideas, their vision, their passion with the right funding, okay? And gone are the days where we can say, well, the government needs to do this, the government needs to do that. We are the government. I don't know about you guys, but you know, I'm satisfied with the taxes I presently pay, okay? So I don't know if I need those to increase any longer.
Right.
But let's now go out there and speak with venture capitalists. Let's go out there and find the PPPs, you know, to see if there's an appetite for investing in these types of ventures. I think there is, but usually the individual with the funding also had the idea. And the individual with the funding is now realizing, and thank God for media, they're now watching things like Shark Tank. They're realizing, hey, I don't have to control this process end to end. I can just be an investor in someone else's vision. And I think that's where we are right now. You know, it was in a conversation over the weekend, I heard an interesting stat. A lot of the new farmers are females. You have more females getting into farming than males in the past. You know, the old stereotype that our farmers are 60 years and over, that's subsiding. But everyone is doing it in isolation. We have to build a marketplace.
The other thing,
how do you bring people together? Yeah,
Sorry.
go ahead.
bringing people together, but before you begin to bring them together, I think we also have to start from young too, eh? I think, and then we started to do a lot of that in some of the schools. Right behind Milo Butler Distributors, you have D.W. Davis that has been growing chickens for quite some time. And then you also have backyard farming being done by other schools like H.O. Nash and some of those other entities. And it seems as though they reach a particular pocket and then it stops. And there is no additional funding being given. So perhaps another thing that can also happen is maybe some of us businesses adopt a school, adopt a program, and begin to see exactly how does these things actually look coming to market, and then begin to have discussions with the students and the teachers on what was good about the product and what was not so good about the product, so they could begin to fine tune and begin to give us the information that, hey, what do you now need to do, or what sort of funding do you now need to make this a going concern? So that we can now see a younger farmer, be it male or female, coming up, and they're also coming up with the solutions to the problems that we face in our country, in our archipelago, of not being able to meet those needs. So I think that is the way in which we try to bridge a lot of this and cause it to happen, starting from the very, very, very young age. But I think oftentimes we tend to have a drop, and there's no picking up of that, and that individual is no longer seen doing hardly anything in farming. But there are people who love it, and I think for those who love it, we ought to embrace their love for it and cause it to come to fruition.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's obviously a good starting point, right? Start young and build a foundation. But in terms of the full execution, connecting all the dots between the businesses, the government, and really making sure the marketplaces are fully supplied. There's a lot of heavy lifting to be done, right? And you mentioned bringing in the financing, right? Yeah. The right funding sources. Do you have any ideas how that can be structured?
Well, I see PPPs because we are familiar with PPPs in the country. I see that being utilized.
Yes.
I also think that some of the existing venture capitalists, some of the existing corporate service providers, some of the existing businesses that we always look to for smaller scale investments can probably start to move in that direction.
I see.
You mentioned, and I cannot leave out the digital platforms, because I think that this is a great opportunity for digital platforms now to get into these types of funds where they can raise those funds globally. But you mentioned the heavy lifting. Maybe I'm an optimist. Maybe we as a family are optimists, right? There are only 400,000, 500,000 people in the Bahamas. There are 8 billion people globally. All right, we have to change our mindset and have a paradigm shift of stop trying to be the big fish in a small pond. And if we work together collectively, right, we can get there quicker than required. So, my cousin's passion, that's 25 years of let's not make this political. Okay, let's all sit at the table. Let's fully map out what needs to get done. All right, let's have BAIC, BAMSI, the private sector, the technical sector, the farming sector, have them all come together. When I say private sector, I'm talking about the grocers and distributors, and let's have the conversation.
Great.
All right? And in having that conversation, we may be surprised that we can get to where we wish to be sooner than later. You know, as the old expression goes, if you want to move fast, move alone. But if you want to move far, move together.
Tremendous. On that note, I think that's a wonderful, wonderful place to close. But Alan, if you have any final comments, I'd allow you.
The only comment I wanted to add to that was the same model that we use to try to influence getting tourists here or to encourage banking. We ought to use a similar type of platform to begin to increase our food footprint here in the country and being able to get that. So whatever logistics we use to try to cause those individuals to be to invest in our and whatever courses we had there, I think there ought to be a similar type of thing that we use to cause this food distribution to actually happen.
You're right. It's never been a hard sell getting tourists to come here.
Right.
No, right?
No.
And we have the resources. We know what
Yes.
they want. And so a matter of giving it to them in the right way, right?
Exactly.
Indeed, indeed. Well, thank you so much
Thank
for
you, Mr.
joining me,
Jones.
Alan
pleasure.
Butler, as well as Javon Butler. Really was an interesting conversation. I know that everyone benefited tremendously and are thinking a bit more deeply about how we can secure the food in this country.
Exactly.
Right? So thank you very much.
Pleasure.
And thank you to our viewership for joining us today. This episode of Jones & Company was brought to you by Milo Butler and Sons Distributors, as well as Agio Digital. Thank you, and have a wonderful evening.
Okay, so we just have small talk now for the. Sorry, I'm being host now.
Yes,
Just for the
right.
credits, I don't know what's going last. No, but
We are up the same time as you, starting our day working hard to make sure you have the essentials to start your day right. We distribute products that are embedded in your everyday living. We understand how important mornings are from work to school. These are the moments we love, togetherness. Milo B helps to get your day started from our house to yours.